America's Constitution resides here in the National Archives. Its Bill of Rights protects freedoms such as speech, the press, and religion. It says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Today's prevailing opinion believes that means government and God can have nothing to do with each other, thus creating a high wall separating church and state. But what did the Founding Fathers who wrote it actually mean?
When the founders talked about separation of church and state, they had a historical context that we really lack.
Reverend HYATT, author of Pilgrims and Patriots.
Church and state was merged together, and the church used the power of the state to enforce its doctrines and practices.
He says certain governments used deadly force against dissenters who wanted to worship in their own way.
Those people were persecuted, burned at the stake, some had their tongues cut out. The founders did not want that kind of Christianity.
And so that's the context they have of separation of church and state. It was never the church taking over the state, it was always the state taking over the church.
Author NEWCOMBE, who wrote the book that made America, says the founders opposed such force.
They didn't want to have a national established Church of America like you have the Church of England, forcing people to believe something that they didn't believe in.
Thomas Jefferson wrote to worried pastors in a famous 1802 letter assuring them government wouldn't interfere with their faith.
Because there's a wall of separation between church and state. And so the way he used it is, guys, the government's not going to stop religious activities.
Then almost 150 years later, more liberal justices and judges began to interpret that to mean government had to wall off any touch of faith on any public institution or the people in it. William Federer, author of the daily American Minute.
And that's when they began to reinterpret that phrase to say, no, we're going to get faith and God and everything out.
Such as the 1980 Supreme Court ruling that kicked the Ten Commandments out of public schools.
They said if the Ten Commandments were on the schoolroom wall, the children might read them, meditate on them, venerate them, and obey them.
We got to make sure that kid doesn't say God at graduation. You can't let a kid pray over their lunch.
HYATT says the founders would be distressed by these rulings.
To ban Bible reading and prayer from public schools, remove crosses and Ten Commandment displays from public places.
Attorney Jeremy Dice fights for religious rights.
When the government tells you what you can believe and what you cannot believe, that is a significant loss in our freedom.
It's ironic that judges will say, well, we have to maintain separation of church and state. They're quoting from Jefferson, and Jefferson in the Declaration said all men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Here's Jefferson acknowledging he believed in a Creator, and they're using his phrase out of context to prohibit a Creator.
In that same letter, Jefferson showed where he stands.
At the end of it, Thomas Jefferson says, will you please pray to God for me, and I will pray to God for you. He violates the separation of church and state in the very letter that gave us the phrase.
And right after he wrote it,
President Jefferson left the White House to go to the United States Capitol at the time to do what? To go to church that Sunday.
In the Capitol.
In the United States Capitol buildings.
The U.S. Supreme Court has more than 50 depictions of the Ten Commandments in its own building.
George Washington was sworn in on the Holy Bible. He said, so help me God, which was the common way of taking oaths. George Washington even leaned down and kissed the Holy Bible.
They did not want a national church, but they wanted God in all of their proceedings.
So, you know, if their idea was, well, there should be no reference to God in our government, then the founders, you know, absolutely were schizophrenic. They absolutely did not mean the separation of God and government.
As NEWCOMBE put it, while the founders made religious freedom a priority, they certainly did not intend to make America into some sort of secular wasteland. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from the National Archives.